Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a very special episode of the Napoleon Bonaparte podcast. And for those of you who are listening in, you probably won't appreciate the reason why it is special. But for those of you watching us for the first time, you will realise why it is special. And for those of you listening in, David has just stood up on camera to show off the official Napoleon Bonaparte podcast T-shirts, which can be bought through the Napoleon Bonaparte store links on our site. We get a couple of bucks every time you buy a T-shirt, so it all helps to pay for David's scotch and my
Come to
milkshakes.
think of it, I'm not sure that I've ever actually received any payment for these shirts. So go out there and buy more shirts.
That's because no one's ever bought. I think we've sold like 2 shirts, maybe ever, and I think you and I bought those. Welcome to the show, episode number 36, Mr. Markham. You look damn fine on video today, sir, I must say.
Well, thank you very much. I want for the record to point out that when the camera and I started talking a few minutes ago, he sprung on me this idea that we would do the video today. So, you know, if I look a real mess, you can blame him. Not me.
Look,
I didn't get a chance to get a haircut.
I haven't had a shave. I haven't brushed my hair, so you know it's not
my usual handlers. I gave the day off because I didn't think it mattered how I looked. I mean, it was all, you know. On the other hand, for those of you who are wondering what my medication looks like, we certainly don't want you to wonder anymore. And the T-shirt, in fact, is one of our official T-shirts, which I did run upstairs to put on.
I did, and I'm wearing a homemade Andy Warhol Velvet Underground album cover T-shirt.
Here we have a banana, and
Yes,
we're going nowhere with that other than to say, you know, don't step on the banana peel.
And for the people who are listening in and missing out on all of the hijinks, I'm holding up a copy of Napoleon for Dummies so people can see that it is the official Bible of the show by some character called J. David Markham. Don't know much about him, but apparently he's a
character.
A character, yeah.
Yes, he's a character.
Without putting too fine a point on it. Now, the last episode, again, I'm going to apologise for people, major technical hookups, and we've gone for technical issues, and we've jumped from that to technical flashness today. Video, audio, dancing girls, special effects, it's all happening. We left the show last time, at the end of episode 35, David, with Joseph Fouché, scallywag that he was.
Ooh, hiss.
Trying to figure out what he's going to do. The news of the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo has reached Paris. Napoleon is yet to reach Paris himself. And I believe you're going to kick off today by talking through some of Joseph Fouché's options, correct?
Well, sure. You have to remember that Fouché is the prime mover and shaker at this point, other than Napoleon, and this whole period of time coming up here between Waterloo and St. Helena is, you know, basically a clash between these two antagonists, and it's really difficult to say who has the edge. Napoleon probably has the edge if he chooses to use it, because he is the emperor. He has a certain amount of power. But Fouché is brilliant. Fouché is in Paris. Fouché has sort of set up the politics of things. But as I think I said last time, and I'll say again, and just in case I didn't, Fouché has had his plans sort of flummoxed by Napoleon's quick defeat at Waterloo. I don't believe that Fouché really believed that Napoleon was going to be able to stay as emperor. But Fouché wanted more time to play his political game and to achieve whatever goals he had. And it's a little hard to be sure what his goals were initially. You have the possibility of Louis XVIII, of course, being returned, and you also have the possibility of a regent with Napoleon's son, a regency with Napoleon's son being declared Napoleon II. And there are actually other options. There's the option which Fouché doesn't want, but the possibility of declaring a republic. There are certainly many people in the chambers who would like to see that. And there's other branches, at least one other branch, the Orléans branch of the Bourbons, that have some claim to the throne. And there's at least some, lip service being given to the possibility that they might come along. So Fouché has to deal with all of this. And of course, the number one thing that Fouché wants to do is to preserve his own position. I mean, let's be very clear about this. American politicians, and I'm sure politicians in all countries, are sometimes accused of really being mostly interested in preserving their own power or their own position, whether it be senator or prime minister or whatever the case might be. Well, and there's undoubtedly some truth to that. Well, Fouché is a master at preserving his position. The number one person he wants to look out for is himself. He and some of his supporters, I would say apologists, will say, well, he always had the interest of France. The same is true with Talleyrand.
Does Fouché have apologists? Is there a Fouché society, a Fouché club?
Well, there's no Fouché society, but there are apologists. I think there's more apologists for Maurice de Talleyrand, and we'll talk about Talleyrand a little bit later. He has some very serious apologists or supporters, call them what you wish, who really truly believe that everything he did was in the interest of France. And the fact that everything he did just happened to also promote his own interests was purely coincidental. That said, Fouché is sitting in Paris. Napoleon is north of Paris somewhere. Fouché may or may not even know at any given moment where Napoleon is, and Fouché has to really be concerned about what he does. First of all, he understands that there's no groundswell of demand for the return of Louis XVIII. There had not been a groundswell for Louis XVIII in 1814, and there's not going to be a groundswell of demand in 1815. And he has to do what he can if he's going to end up supporting Louis coming back, to see to it that it doesn't appear to be something that's imposed strictly by the Allies. That was a big problem in 1814, and one of the reasons why the government was very unpopular and ineffective. Moreover, there's some question as to whether or not Fouché would do well under a Louis XVIII restoration unless the king sees his success, his return, as being the work of Joseph Fouché. If the king comes back because the Allies put him in place and sort of over the objections of Paris, then why would the king care too much for Fouché? And Fouché, after all, had been collaborating with Napoleon while the king was in power after 1814. So if the king is coming back, Fouché has to make sure that the king sees his return as having been at least somewhat dependent on Fouché's action. Otherwise, he could be in big trouble. In fact, might very well have been shot for treason, since, as I say, he was in touch with Napoleon when Napoleon was on the island of Elba. He was really playing both ends against the middle. He also has to be concerned that Napoleon might very well return to Paris and find a way to rally the nation once again against the onrushing Allied forces. When nations are attacked, they tend to unite, even if they are splintered politically in most situations. Look at the United States after 9/11, and I think we've made this analogy before. For a period of time, there was very universal support for government action in response to the attacks on the Twin Towers and elsewhere on 9/11. That goodwill, that unity was ultimately squandered. But for the short term, even people like me who were no fan of the president were very supportive of going into Afghanistan, for example, and so on. And lots of people in France who may or may not have been big fans of Napoleon, may or may not have thought that was the right thing to do, if he could rally the troops and show that the La patrie est en danger, the fatherland is in danger, then Fouché might be powerless to look out for his interests. Napoleon, for example, could dissolve the chambers and take absolute power, a little bit like the position of dictator in ancient Rome. We have a dangerous situation here. The emperor has the ability to declare what in America we would call today a state of emergency, and run the country as an absolute monarch in essence until the danger had passed. And by the way, if Napoleon does this, Fouché knows which end of a rope he's going to be on. There's just no way that Fouché is going to survive that kind of operation.
Why is that? I mean, Napoleon had tolerated Fouché and found him necessary for almost the entirety of his time in power. Why now would Fouché feel that he was at risk?
Because I believe that Napoleon has finally understood that Fouché is double dealing, that Fouché is, in essence, maybe trying to use Napoleon, certainly is no friend of Napoleon's. I think it was very clear by now that Fouché was involved in at least the possibility of bringing back Louis. People in Paris, I'm sure, would have been quick to inform Napoleon of some of the kinds of shenanigans that Fouché was doing, and Fouché would have been out. Now, of course, I could be wrong. I mean, we're all speculating at this stage, but from everything I've read, that's what I firmly believe. And you have other possibilities. The two legislative chambers, led, let's say, by someone like the Marquis de Lafayette, who Americans certainly know as having played a major role in the French support in the American War of Independence, and who was a very popular figure throughout the period of the Revolution. And somebody like Lafayette could, at least in theory, seize control of the legislative branch of the government, and possibly either support the declaration of Napoleon II, or a very long shot try to go for some kind of a republic. It's a little more difficult to see that scenario playing out, but it certainly was a possibility that Fouché and others had to consider. So those are the kinds of things that Fouché has to deal with or think about, and he has to think about them and deal with them in fairly short order. Because the biggest fear that he has is Napoleon's going to march into Paris. He's going to walk in to the chambers. He's going to say, the country is in danger. The enemy is at the gates. We need to unite now. We need to unite and fight against the enemy. This is no time for political bickering. This is no time for debating, who should be the ruler, who shouldn't. There'll be plenty of time for that once we have defeated our enemies. And so I'm dissolving Parliament, dissolving the two chambers. I'm taking control of the government. I'm going to rally the country, And quite frankly, I think he would have been very, very successful at doing that
I mean,
had he operated much more quickly than he did.
one of the interesting things about you even positing that as a scenario is that I suspect many of Napoleon's critics would say that Napoleon was already an absolute monarch, an absolute dictator in France, that the legislative houses were really a farce, that it was really Napoleon's will that drove everything, and that he was already in that position.
Well, you need to remember, though, Cameron, that when Napoleon came back from Elba, that he was essentially forced to reach out to the liberals and to the revolutionaries, and they passed the Act Additional, the additional act of the Constitution, which limited his ability to absolutely control things, which gave the chambers more power than they normally had. Uh, could he still take charge? Could he still seize control in the name of an emergency? Yeah, he could have if he had arrived quickly and if he had acted as soon as he arrived. But he did not arrive quickly, as we'll see, and he did not act quickly. He was torn between various kinds of choices. He was very reluctant, and I think those people who criticize him for being a dictator or for being someone who ruled somewhat absolutely, which I don't think is actually true, but need to recognize that Napoleon was in fact very, very reluctant to follow the advice of a number of his top advisors, both military and political, and to simply seize control to unify the nation. Napoleon had a base of popularity that would have allowed him to do that, but he needed to do it quickly. Now, Fouché is very, very careful to play both ends against the middle. He goes to Lafayette and the liberals and warns them about the possibility of a dictatorship. Be careful now, if Napoleon shows up, we've got to be sure he doesn't declare himself a dictator. He would go to the Bonapartists, and he are his minions, and essentially try to get them to feel that all was lost for Napoleon after Waterloo, but if they the chambers were united against the emperor, but that it was still possible, if they played their cards right, to have Napoleon abdicate, and then the King of Rome, Napoleon's son, be declared the new emperor with Marie Louise as a regency. And some of the allies, Metternich, for example, had actually suggested that this was a possibility, and the Bonapartists were encouraged by this. I mean, I think there was a lot of folks who believed that after Waterloo, that it really was all over for Napoleon. That at that point, the Allies simply would not tolerate Napoleon. But an awful lot of people did believe that if they could unite behind the King of Rome, Napoleon's son, that would be possible. I think it was a bit of a pipe dream, and I don't think that Fouché for a minute really, planned to do that. He occasionally said that he did. I mean, that was one of the games he played, but I think he was still looking to bring in the king. At any rate, so Fouché's telling the Bonapartists that if they want to preserve the empire, they can, but not under Napoleon I, but rather under Napoleon II. And again, Metternich representing Austria, clearly the Austrians would have at least some theoretical interest in such a regency, because it would be the daughter of the Emperor of Austria as the regent and the de facto power for a number of years, and then the grandson of the Emperor eventually becoming the Emperor of France. And so it would be reasonable for the Austrians to assume that they would become good close buddies, good allies. And again, if you look at a map of Europe at that time, and I probably should have brought a map of that time over here with me, and you can look at how big France was, and particularly the French Empire, and then you look at Austria. You're talking about a really, really big chunk of Western and Central Europe, and this would be a very, very powerful force. So Austria certainly would have at least given some serious consideration to that possibility. At least that's what a lot of folks would assume. At any rate, Napoleon arrives in Paris around 5:30 or so in the morning of the 21st of June. Now, he has been traveling almost nonstop for several days. He's gotten a little rest here and a little rest there. He's had close calls. He's not had all of his staff with him for an awful lot of this time.
Hasn't eaten as well. I've got a quote, a letter, I guess, from him here from, I should hold it up, the words of Napoleon, the Emperor Day by Day. It says 21st
Very
Paris.
good book, by the way.
I have had no food for 3 days. This must be him writing later from maybe St. Helena. I had had no food for 3 days. I was extremely tired. As soon as I arrived, I jumped into my bath and had something to eat. There you go. Lavalette, he came to me with a frightful epileptic laugh. Don't know what that refers to. But yeah, hadn't eaten for 3 days. Obviously, very, very difficult period on the run after Waterloo, literally. Being chased by the Allies to some degree and heading with due haste to Paris.
Well, sure, and Napoleon actually sent his valet, Constant, ahead of him to alert the staff at the Élysée Palace and so forth. And Armand de Caulaincourt rushed over there to meet him and describes their meeting, which shows just how desperate Napoleon's situation was. And I'll read you excerpts from it. The emperor arrived early in the morning, overcome by grief and exhausted by fatigue. He endeavored to give vent to the emotions of the heart, but his oppressed respiration permitted him only to articulate broken sentences. The army, he said, has performed prodigies of valor, inconceivable efforts. What troops! Ney behaved like a madman. He caused my cavalry to be cut to pieces. All has been sacrificed. I am ill and exhausted. I must lie down for an hour or two. My head burns. I must take a bath. And the subtitle of the chapter in my upcoming book is in fact Politics from the Bath, and that's exactly what he does. He's exhausted. He's tired. As I suggest in the book, it would be fascinating to imagine what would happen if, rather than resting, if rather than cleaning up, taking a bath, all this kind of stuff, here he is. He's dirty. He's got the grime of several days of travel, of being on the battlefield. I'm sure, looks horribly fatigued. If he had simply marched in later that morning into the chambers and announced the situation and demanded that they support him, with the image of this battle-fatigued warrior who was fighting for France, it's very easy to imagine that the chambers would have not had to have been dissolved. They would have passed unanimously support for the emperor and another levee en masse or whatever they thought was necessary. Fouché would have been caught off guard. He did not have time to defend against that. That was the one thing that would have absolutely vetoed Fouché, because he couldn't stand up himself and raise arguments against any of this stuff. So he would have had to have probably packed his bags in a hurry, or maybe he could have tried to pretend to be a big supporter of Napoleon, rounded up a few people who were less supportive, and had them shot or something to show Napoleon where his heart was. I don't know. But General Labédoyère begged Napoleon to keep his uniform on and rally the chambers to the defense of the fatherland. But Napoleon didn't do that. And any number of historians, I'm hardly the only one, any number of historians will tell you that Napoleon acted very differently, certainly after Waterloo. Some think during the Battle of Waterloo and maybe even before, but certainly after Waterloo, Napoleon almost seemed resigned to a fate that he could not control. And I don't know if he really felt that way, but that's certainly the way he acted. He delayed. He wouldn't take the initiative. He had a tendency to react to the actions of others rather than to cause others to have to react to his actions. And that's a very, very big difference as far as Napoleon is concerned. Napoleon was always the man of action. He was the greatest man of action probably in European history since Charlemagne 1,000 years earlier anyway. And for him to go and take a bath and rest while his advisors were trying to figure out how best to retrieve the situation is very, very unlike Napoleon. And so, he's not going to go lie down and try to sleep. He's too restless. So he retires to a bath. And he tells Caulaincourt that he's going to call the chambers into session and go before them and explain things. And then once he's got their support, he's going to go and return to the army.
I've got a quote here in Vincent Cronin's book that we've referred to many times over the series.
A very classic, very excellent book.
Before you started writing, it was probably the finest Napoleonic biography, but now obviously surpassed by some of the Markham opuses. Is that the plural for opus? Opusi?
I don't know. I will leave it to readers to judge whether my work is as good or better or not as good than Vincent Cronin's. But I will say that when I wrote my first biography of Napoleon's Road to Glory, back in, I think, 1995, the two books that I thought it might potentially replace, I mean, whether it did or not is open to debate, obviously, but the two books that I thought it might replace, one was Vincent Cronin's book, and the other was Felix Markham's little book, Napoleon. No relation to me, as we've discussed before. So if you want to look at, well, what books have I written, and what has been their purpose, their purpose is similar to Cronin and to Felix Markham. But I still consider Cronin to be an absolute must-read for anyone serious about learning, about Napoleon.
And it has a special place in my library, I guess, because it was the first book I ever read on Napoleon back some 20 years ago. I noticed it in a little bookshop in Melbourne and thought, I don't know anything about Napoleon, I should read that. And it was the book that set me on my journey. Anyway, he says, Napoleon plunged into a steaming bath and there received his Minister of War. Ah, Davout! Napoleon lifted his arms in welcome. Then, all nerves, let them fall back in the bathwater, splashing the marshal's uniform. Davout revealed that the assembly was in a hostile mood. It will paralyse the people's patriotism, he alliterated. I'm adding that bit in. Your Majesty must dissolve the assembly. Napoleon got out of his bath and conferred with his Council of State. There Lucien too begged him to dissolve the assembly. But Napoleon could not believe the deputies would act against him. He decided instead to ask them for full powers. So, obviously, several of his advisors are suggesting that he does collapse the legislative houses and take full power, but he decides instead to ask them to grant him full powers. Do you think this harkens back to what you mentioned before, the fact that he was conscious of the delicacy of his position after the return from Elba?
Well, I think he is conscious of the delicacy of his position, and he also is going to be given conflicting advice. But a lot of it has to do, again, I think, with a level of despondency that it's difficult for us to imagine, and yet it should be fairly obvious that would not be unexpected. For example, he's talking with the Caulaincourt again in the bath, I think, still, and he says, "I no longer have an army. I have nothing but fugitives. I shall find men, but how are they to be armed? I have no muskets left. However, with unanimity, everything prepared. I think you have formed a wrong judgment of their spirit. It is French. I have only against me.
Hey, David.
I have against me only.
Can I stop you there? I just had a glitch and I missed about 10 seconds of what you were saying there. The video froze. Can you just start the Caulaincourt quote again, and I'll edit it together somehow?
Just how cold is it over there? You said the video froze. I thought I was pretty hot.
It's the middle of summer here, man. It must be your end.
That's right. It is the middle of summer there. How could anything freeze? Well, Napoleon is despondent, and it's those of us who study Napoleon, it's a little hard to imagine him being despondent. But if you think about what he's just gone through, it's not real surprising. He's talking with Caulaincourt again, and he says, "I no longer have an army. I have nothing but fugitives. I shall find men, but how are they to be armed? I have no muskets left. However, with unanimity, everything may be repaired. I hope the deputies will second me, that they will feel the responsibility that will rest upon them. I think you have formed a wrong judgment of their spirit. It is French. I have against me only Lafayette, Lajeunesse, Flageolet, and a few others. These would fain have nothing to do with me, I know. I am a restraint upon them. My presence here will control them." And Count Lavalette arrives, and Lavalette says that most of the people in the chambers are wanting Napoleon to abdicate, and what are you going to do about it? So Napoleon calls, as you suggested in your quote, calls for this meeting of the Council of Ministers, and they begin to arrive. Baron de Meneval arrives, finding Napoleon still in the bath, quote, "overwhelmed with fatigue and care, and yet mastering the grief with which he was devoured." I have my own little glitch here. His brothers arrive, Joseph, Lucien, and they're also telling him, things aren't the way you would like them to be. Lucien in particular says, "Listen, you need to prorogue the chambers. You need to bounce them out on their ear. You need to seize power. If you don't, you will be in trouble. They are not going to support you. You should expect the worst from the chambers. And don't trust Lafayette." In fact, Napoleon said, "Yeah, and of all those folks you're talking about, Lafayette clearly is one of the problems." And I'm looking across the way here, and I've got an engraving of Lafayette I should have brought over to show you.
He was never a big fan of Napoleon's, was he, Lafayette?
Well, he wasn't really, and the irony is he owed a great deal to Napoleon. He had left France toward the end of the Revolution, and for his effort had been thrown into prison by the Austrians. And when Napoleon defeated Austria in the First Italian campaign, one of the demands that he made of the Austrians was to release Lafayette from prison, which they did. They agreed to do it, and they did. And so, you would like to think that Lafayette would have been a little bit kinder toward Napoleon. But you also have to remember, especially if you studied Lafayette at all and you know where he goes later in history and what he's done before, Lafayette's a politician. And Lafayette has a big ego, like I think a lot of politicians do. Historians never have big egos, you understand, but and podcasters have no ego at all.
No.
But politicians do, and I don't doubt a bit that Lafayette saw himself as potentially saving the country, declaring a republic, maybe even being at its head, at least in some figurehead of a way, if not, absolutely at its head. And essentially, Lafayette is saying things like, we are going to declare the session to be in permanent session, or the chambers to be in permanent session, and we're going to demand Napoleon's abdication. And Lafayette was convinced that Napoleon was going to become a dictator, and that only Lafayette could preserve a republic. Lafayette wasn't big on bringing in Louis XVIII. Lafayette would love to have had a republic, but of course, Fouché is playing Lafayette like a drum. He is getting Lafayette to carry the water, and the goal is not a republic. The goal is the return of this man, and I thought I would just take advantage of our video opportunity here. Here we have a period pressed wood snuff box of Louis XVIII and all of his glory. You are entitled to boo and hiss all you want, but it's a snuff box that was used to surprise, keep snuff, and it's one of the boxes from my collection. And a lot of folks probably wish I would hold it like this, that this is a much better image to look at than this. And for those of you who are listening, I just held the box so it blocked out my face, and all you got to see was my Napoleonic hairline.
I still don't understand how any of these guys thought that they would benefit from bringing back Louis. I mean, Louis had been a disaster after the first abdication, and obviously was ill-suited to be king. He was fat, he was lazy, he was dumb, he was a coward. When Napoleon came back after Elba, he ran away with his tail tucked between his legs. Why would any of these guys want Louis back? Was it just so the rest of Europe would get off their case? Or was it because they thought they would somehow benefit from his magnificence if they, as you said before, if they were seen to be engineering or orchestrating his return? They thought they'd get, a bonus in their paycheck that month or something.
Well, all of the above, Cameron. First of all, there were people who thought, well, if I can help bring Louis back, Louis will take care of me. Some of them who had been with Louis before, some of them like Fouché, who thought, well, if I can convince Louis that he's back because of me, I may do okay, which ultimately, as we know, is what happens.
But Louis was, Fouché by this stage, well, not long after this, was already the president of the government.
No, not yet.
But it was soon after this he becomes president of the interim government. He was obviously in a position of great power and great influence, particularly in a France without Napoleon. Wouldn't it have been a smarter move for Fouché to try and turn himself into the new first consul?
No, well, that would never happen. The only real way, and we're getting a little ahead of the game here, the only real way Fouché manages to engineer that is, number one, he's up against an idiot who should have been the president of the provisional government, but was outfoxed by Fouché, and I'll tell you that story a little bit later. And number two, the provisional government was created largely because it was seen as a step toward Napoleon II. There was no support of any significance for making Fouché the new first consul or the new president of a republic. Fouché was able to manipulate the situation well, but Fouché did not have the personal charisma or popularity that would ever have allowed him to seize power in his own name in a permanent way. Lafayette did. Lafayette could conceivably have ended up as the head of a republic or some other kind of government. But Fouché could. I mean, Fouché is an expert behind the scenes. Fouché is very good at manipulating political situations. He's a very good spy, and to support somebody else was Fouché's goal.
Not a front man.
And Fouché's abilities. Yeah, to be a front man for somebody or whatever.
No, I was saying Fouché wasn't a front man. He was the guy behind the scenes, pulling the strings and manipulating outcomes.
Well, yeah, that's right.
I want to ask you.
Really, Lafayette's more the front man. I mean, Lafayette really, I think, fooled himself into believing, for a time anyway, that somehow he was going to preserve a French republic. That he, because of his popularity, would be asked by the Allies to form a government, and that would only be possible when Napoleon was gone. So Lafayette's first goal is the same as Fouché's, the same as the Royalists, and that's what I was trying to give you some idea of who was supporting the Louis. I mean, there were a lot of folks that they may or may not have thought Louis was the greatest person in the world, but they truly believed in the Bourbon right to rule. Louis is the king. He's legitimate. There's been lots of kings in history that weren't necessarily popular, and a lot of folks kind of roll their eyes and say, well, how do we get stuck with this one? But he's the king, and therefore he's legitimate, and therefore we should bring him back.
But what about the whole purpose of the revolution, the ideology of the revolution, which kicked out that royal bloodline? And I don't understand why there wasn't a bigger push to go back to maybe the consulate, the pre-empire days, bring back some of the other contenders of the original consulate.
Well, I don't think there was ever any movement to go back to a consulate to come up with three people to rule as first, second, and third consuls. I do think, however, that there was certainly a move to bring in a republic. So you really have the choice of an empire, either with Napoleon or Napoleon's son, a republic, or a monarchy. Most likely Louis XVIII, but conceivably one of the other members of the royal family, and we'll talk a little bit about that later.
Just a couple of questions before you move on. By this stage,
Sure.
Where were guys from the original consulate, Lebrun, Combeferre, these guys? Had they completely vanished from the scene? Had they died? Do you know where they were at this stage?
I don't really know where they are, other than that they're not involved with this. I don't think any of those folks are to be found in any of this political maneuvering that's going on.
They've retired, left the political landscape, or died.
Yeah,
or
whether they died or retired or whatever. In all honesty, I couldn't tell you. I know it'll come as a shock to you, Cameron, but every now and then there's going to be, however a minor detail it might be, some little tiny piece of Napoleonic history to which I do not have immediate recall.
Shatters all of my illusions.
I know,
of you, David.
I'm sorry to disillusion you and our loyal listeners.
I got another question for you about Fouché. I can't remember where I've read this, but some stage over the years I've read some account that during this most recent series of battles, that Fouché had actually been intercepting the orders of the day issuing from Napoleon, handing them over to the Allies. I don't think we talked much about that when we were discussing the battles. Is this something that he disclosed in his own memoirs, which I've never had an opportunity to read, or is this a conspiracy theory?
He's quite proud of it, and I thought I mentioned it in our pre-Waterloo discussion, but I might not have. He actually writes about it in his memoirs. He didn't do it a lot, but he did have access to the orders that were going out, and he did send some of them to the wrong people. There's a little dispute at one point in his memoirs. He talks about how he caused it to be sent out to make the royalists like him, but did it in such a way that it would arrive too late to do them any good. But you've got to remember when you're reading memoirs in general, and certainly memoirs of Joseph Fouché, that this is not necessarily something that you want to take as the gospel truth. And by the way, just for fun,
let the record show David's just left his chair to walk up to his library, for those of you listening in and not watching.
Here's the dreaded. This is volume 1 of 2 volumes of Fouché's memoirs, and I'm just wanted to look to see if there was a frontispiece here. Sure enough, here we have a very interesting engraving of Joseph Fouché for you to look at.
He doesn't look anything like.
And that's the title page, complete with my fingers. But yeah, I've read most of this through, and it's interesting, and there are some things in the book that are worth quoting. And in my next book, I do quote from what Fouché has to say. If for nothing else, it's important to know what Fouché claims. But when you read memoirs like Fouché, on the other end of the spectrum, like Bourrienne, one of Napoleon's secretaries, you have to take them with a grain, if not a bucket of salt. You need to, as someone once said, trust but verify. If Fouché says such and such a thing happened, well, it may have, but it would be particularly useful if you could find somebody else who confirms that in fact such and such a thing was said or happened or whatever. And in some cases, that's the case. I mean, some of what everything Fouché does is self-serving, but that doesn't mean that it's all a lie. I mean, some things in there are accurate and some things aren't.
Are there any accounts from the Allies' side saying that they were receiving inside information from Fouché during these battles?
I've not come across that, but I wouldn't doubt that there might be. And it wouldn't be there wouldn't be as much of it as you're suggesting. Like I say, to my knowledge, there was really very little of that. Now, what Fouché did do was to delay operations against those people who were known not to be big fans of Napoleon. Okay, he was supposed to arrest certain people, throw certain people in prison, etc., etc., take other kinds of actions. He didn't refuse to do things, but he took his good time about it because he figured that those people would eventually be useful to him and perhaps to a returned Louis XVIII. And by the way, that's true. I mean, he's a brilliant politician. He played his game well. He outplayed Napoleon. He outplayed Lafayette. He like I said, he played Lafayette like a drum. He played some of the other folks like a drum. He didn't play Napoleon like a drum, but he outsmarted Napoleon. And in Napoleon's prime, he could never have done that. But after Waterloo, in spite of the fact that he was warned by people, Sabre was warning him, his brother was warning him, other people, Davout comes in, finds Napoleon still in his bath, and says, shut down the chambers, become a temporary dictator. And then Davout goes to the Council of Ministers. Napoleon's still in his bath. Napoleon finally arrives, quite late. Davout has to actually go back to Napoleon and say, "Well, get out of your bathtub already, fella. The walls are crumbling about you. The empire is in danger, to say nothing of the country. And we all understand you needed a rest and you wanted to clean up, but okay, your ministers of state are in the other room. Please come on and tell us what we should do."
Nero is fiddling while Rome burns. Kind of reminds me of my criticisms of Wellington at the beginning of all this, where he's at a ball, although, Napoleon has just come off a battlefield. So slightly different.
Well, and he is talking with people. I mean, you've got several people coming in and talking to him while he's sitting there. His brother Joseph, chairs the meeting until Napoleon gets there. But of course, without Napoleon to take charge, you have all sorts of suggestions being made that might not have been made with Napoleon sitting in the room, including the possibility of abdication and so on. Well, Napoleon joins the meeting, and they have a discussion. Carnot, who you may remember was the liberal that Napoleon co-opted into forming the new government after returning from Elba, and was the reason why the new constitution was written with the additional acts to it. But Carnot is a patriot, and having bought into Napoleon's empire with its restrictions, he wants Napoleon to rally the nation, call every person to defend Paris, and drive the enemy out. If that won't work, the army can retreat beyond the Loire and set up lines of defense there. I mean, there's a variety of things to do, and to Carnot's credit, having been brought into the government by Napoleon, Carnot is rallying to the cause. Caulaincourt is a little more pragmatic. He's not so sure that closing down the legislative branch is necessarily the best idea. He thinks that Napoleon should treat with the chambers, should try to negotiate with them, should try to get their support. Now, Caulaincourt is a very, very strong supporter of Napoleon, but he doesn't think it's good for Napoleon to simply, get rid of the legislative branch. Fouché naturally supports him in this. Marat and Combercier are also asking for Napoleon to treat the chambers with good faith. They can't imagine that the chambers would not support Napoleon given the situation. A number of other folks in the room, including Davout, you'll recall, Lucien and others, say, no, if you want to stay in power, my friend, you really have to deal with it. You really have to show leadership, seize power, get rid of this group of people whose support you do not have, and go on from there. But Napoleon can't quite bring himself to do it. He gets really angry at one point, even though Carnot and Davout and Caulaincourt and everything are saying, not Caulaincourt so much, but Lucien and Carnot and Davout are saying, no, you've got to prorogue, you've got to get rid of the chambers. And Napoleon thunders, The nation did not elect the deputies to overthrow me, but to support me. Woe to them if the presence of the enemy on the French soil does not arouse their energy and patriotism. I have no need to resort to stratagem. I have right on my side. The patriotism of the people, their antipathy to the Bourbons, who were kept in reserve for them, their attachment to my person. All these circumstances still afford immense resources if we know how to profit by them. Well, maybe, but instead of taking action to try to profit by them, instead what we have is delay, obfuscation, debate, argument, and ultimately no really serious action. And, you know, the longer Napoleon stalls, the stronger becomes Fouché's position. You know, Fouché gets stronger every minute. Napoleon gets weaker every minute. There's absolutely no question about that. And Napoleon is meeting with a council of ministers. Fouché has made certain that the council, or excuse me, Napoleon's dealing with his council of state. Fouché has made certain that the council of ministers goes into session late in the morning of the 21st of June, while Napoleon is still back at the Élysée Palace. Okay. Now, normally, the chambers meet in the afternoon, but now they're meeting in the morning, and we have a phone call.
For some reason, my wife is trying to call me from one of the other rooms in the house, knowing that I'm recording the show, but apparently choosing to ignore that for the moment. My apologies.
Well, your lovely wife no doubt heard that we were doing a video and wants to come down and smile for the camera.
That could be it. I've turned the volume off, so apologies,
Well,
folks.
I think you should invite your wife to come down and smile for the camera personally. I mean, that would be my guess, but,
Oh,
you know,
thank you.
what can I tell you?
Let us continue.
At any rate,
She probably thinks we're finished by now.
well, yeah, I think most people wish we were finished by now. It's been about an hour or so.
So let me stop you again. You
Sure.
said that Napoleon's position's getting weaker, Fouché's position's getting stronger, but the very fact that Napoleon hasn't stormed into Paris and declared a dictatorship, doesn't that remove part of Fouché's argument? You mentioned earlier on that Fouché's warning people that Napoleon may do that, come in and declare full powers, and yet he has in fact shown his respect for the legislative reforms by not doing that, by requesting them to give him the powers that he needs. Doesn't that in fact make his position somewhat stronger?
Well, he hasn't got around to requesting anything yet. So far, all he's gotten around to is showing up and jumping into the bath and then meeting with his council of state. So the Chambers doesn't really know at this stage exactly what Napoleon's going to do.
Right.
But they've been told by Fouché and others that things are going to go poorly. And Lafayette is standing up in this morning session and saying things like, we shall not be intimidated by Napoleon. We need to declare ourselves in permanent session and therefore eliminate the possibility that Napoleon could dissolve us. And he urges that the National Guard that he used to control actually be called into service to protect the chambers. And in fact, they pass a resolution saying, number one, the Chamber of Representatives declares the independence of the country is threatened, declares itself in permanent session. Any attempt to dissolve it is high treason. Whoever may be guilty of such an attempt is a traitor to the country and may be summarily judged as such. Guess who they have in mind there? The Army of the Line, the National Guard, are wonderful folks. And they're expected to come here and protect us. The Minister of War, of External Affairs, Minister of Police, of the Interior are to come and present themselves. So very clearly, the Chambers is trying to act as though they are the center of government, asking these ministers to come in and meet with them, asking the military to protect them. It's throwing down the gauntlet to Napoleon. It's saying, okay, you're there, you're who you are, you've got your council of ministers, you're at the Elysee Palace, you're the emperor. But if you think that all of that is going to allow you to just take charge as though we did not exist, then think again. And, Napoleon's supporters in the chambers just allowed it to happen. People didn't understand the true political nature of what was going on. And, it was the end of Napoleon right then. When the chambers made themselves into permanent session, Napoleon lost the ability, really, to take the initiative unchallenged. He could still try to do what Davout was suggesting, Davout and Louis and others. But now he would do it at the risk of being declared a traitor by a portion of the government, his own government. And that would, at the very least, reduce his popularity and also, and very importantly, his claim to legitimacy,
his moral authority,
vis-a-vis the Allies. Pardon?
I was saying his moral authority as well.
Well, his moral authority would be damaged, for sure, but his ability to claim to the Allies that he was still in charge would have been greatly damaged were he to do this. And they pass things and they give speeches, and Queen Hortense, Napoleon's stepdaughter, writes of the Chamber of Representatives. He says, they discuss the principles of political freedom as though armed Europe were advancing to enforce this ideal. I mean, it's like, if you guys declare you're in favor of a republic, you're in favor of political freedom, etc., what do you think the Allies care for that? If they crush Napoleon, they're not going to worry about a republic. They're going to bring the king back. So all these people who were talking about the ideals of liberty and freedom and fighting against the possibility of Napoleon becoming a dictator were, in fact, like I say, Fouché was playing them like a drum. He has got them to do exactly what he needs to discredit Napoleon, to weaken Napoleon. And Napoleon knows he's been had. When he's told what happens, the emperor turned pale with anger. He rose, striking his hand forcibly on the table, explained in a tone of indignation, I ought to have dismissed these men before my departure. I foresaw this. These factious firebrands will ruin France. I can measure the full extent of the evil. They are in open rebellion against legitimate authority. I must reflect on what must be done. Well, there he goes again. He's reflecting, he's thinking, he's not taking action. Time after time after time, he has an opportunity to take action, but he doesn't. And that's a clear problem. The action of the chambers actually was contrary to the Constitution, which gives the emperor the opportunity to do this. And most people would probably suggest it was against the interest of France. But they and Fouché got away with it.
Are you saying it was constitutional for Napoleon to dissolve the assemblies?
That's correct. He had the ability to do that, but he didn't do it.
So his hesitation then wasn't that it was unconstitutional, just that it wouldn't look good.
It wasn't political, and he was still being advised to do this. You've got to understand, huge crowds of supporters are all around the Elysee Palace, and they're all throughout Paris crying "Vive l'Empereur, Vive l'Empereur!" You know, Napoleon is very popular in Paris. As I've suggested to you before, that popularity is not universal out in the hinterlands, but in Paris, he will have the support of the people as well as the army, which certainly is not going to desert him. And Napoleon sends people to the chambers to say, hold on, we're still working on things. Rumors are that they're not buying any of it. Rumors are flying. Everything from Napoleon is seizing power, is leading troops against the chambers, he's abdicating. Wellington and Blucher are at the gates. You know, the barbarian hordes are at the gates. I mean, you know, there's all sorts of rumors going on. Lafayette's going to be made the commander of the Imperial Guard. Who knows? And Napoleon again sends representatives. He sends his ministers, along with Lucien. At 6 o'clock in the evening, clears out the public. And Lucien, you know, reads Napoleon's report, and it doesn't do any good. You know, chaos takes hold. Very little effort towards securing national unity. Clearly, it's not working. Napoleon has lost the support of a substantial amount of the folks there. Lucien gives a fiery speech trying to rally them one last time. That doesn't work. And I could read you the speech, but it really doesn't matter. Lafayette gets up and calms the crowd. He says, "You accuse us of failing in our duties towards our honor and towards Napoleon. Have you forgotten all that we had done for him? Have you forgot we followed him into the sands of Africa, the deserts of Russia, and that the bones of our sons and brothers everywhere attest our fidelity? For him we have done enough. It is our duty now to save our country." And for better or for worse, that's the attitude that's taking hold. That Napoleon is no longer being equated with the nation. It's no longer saving the nation to save Napoleon. And indeed, it may very well, in many minds, be the opposite. And, Napoleon gets word of this. Lucien goes back, gives him a report. Finally, Napoleon is starting to say, the hell with these people. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to take action. But now, he's lost the support even of people like Davout. People who initially said, now is the time to strike, realize that the time to strike has come and gone, that it's too late for Napoleon, that there's really no possibility that Napoleon can do this without creating a civil war. And the last thing that Napoleon wants to do is to create a civil war. And to Napoleon's credit, when he realizes, what's going on, he makes it very, very clear that he does not want to have French fighting French over who gets to rule France. It's one thing to rally the nation against the onrushing allies. He thinks it's a mistake to expect him to advocate. He thinks it's a mistake to show that kind of weakness. He talks to Constant and says essentially that, Savary is still trying to get him to take action, but none of it's going to happen. Napoleon makes one last effort. He sends Lucien that night, asking that they rally to the emperor's cause, so that he can lead the nation against the advancing enemy. Wasn't trying to form a new government. The enemy is here now. When we defeat the enemy, you can have whatever government you want. But again, by now, they're not even willing to give Napoleon the opportunity to defeat the oncoming allies.
He's just
And so is the
he's just asking at this stage to be made a general of an army, right, with no political title.
well, he actually makes that exact same suggestion later on, and we'll talk about when he's out at Malmaison. But yeah, he's saying, listen, let's not forget, folks, there's a lot of Prussian and British soldiers streaming toward us. And, as you said, Cameron, a while ago, we don't want to fiddle while Rome burns. Let's face the immediate reality, which is the need to deal with the allies who are coming in. After that, then we can talk about it. Okay? Well, there's a big meeting of ministers and representatives in the Council of Peers, representatives in the Chamber of Representatives, the Chamber of Peers and Chamber of Representatives. And eventually, the question of Napoleon's abdication comes up. It's defeated, but it's a very, very close vote. And it's clear that we're going to have to deal with that issue very, very soon. More reports are given the next day. The chambers reassembles early in the morning. They hear various reports of various meetings, and ultimately they come to the decision that Napoleon needs to go. Now, some want to depose him, in all honesty. Lafayette really wants just to declare Napoleon out. Others say, no. We owe the man this much. We owe him the opportunity to leave gracefully, to abdicate. And clearly, Napoleon is not going to be given any real choice. And indeed, they pass a resolution, quote unquote, to save the honor of the head of state, to allow Napoleon to abdicate. He has 1 hour to do that. If he doesn't do it, then he's going to be deposed. And this is not necessarily them being nice to Napoleon. This is also recognizing that there's tens of thousands of armed people in Paris who support Napoleon. That the army, if Napoleon chooses to call it, will be loyal to the man, to Napoleon. And if they were to try to throw him out, they might find themselves again embroiled in a civil war. No, it's much better if Napoleon abdicates and thus, by doing so, makes it clear that the army, that his other supporters should not attempt to circumvent that abdication, that for the good of the country, he will go. So a delegation of 4 or 5 people comes to Napoleon, and pretty much all of Napoleon's close advisors say, yes, you need to abdicate. He could try a civil war, and he could have probably done some other things, but the option he liked the best was to abdicate in favor of his son, which was a risky proposition, but he figured there were still some folks that were supportive of a regency, and so Napoleon decides that he will abdicate in favor of his son, because Napoleon owed it to his glory and to the nation which had twice confided its destinies to him, to exhibit in the fullest manner the purity of his intentions, and to prove to posterity that if France should perish, it was not at least for the interest of a single man that she was sacrificed. This is what General Gorgon says. So Napoleon will abdicate. He writes his declaration to the French people as such. Declaration to the French people. Frenchmen, in commencing the war to maintain national independence, I counted on the union of all efforts, of all wills, and on the assistance of all the national authorities. I felt justified in hoping for success, and defied all the declarations of the powers against me. The circumstances appear to have changed. I offer myself as a sacrifice to the hatred of the enemies of France. May they be sincere in their declaration and only desire my person. My political life is finished, and I proclaim my son under the title of Napoleon II, Emperor of the French. The present ministers will form provisionally the Council of Government. The interest I carry for my son causes me to ask the chambers to organize, without delay, a regency by law. All of you unite for the public good, for remaining an independent nation. At the Élysée Palace, 22 June 1815, Napoleon. And there he is. We have battling images. You know, you've got yours. Whoops, that's Josephine. Where'd Napoleon go here? I thought
you should put up Louis again, and we could have a fight. Could fight it out.
Okay, well, this is a carved ivory piece, period piece of Napoleon, and just in case I forget to use this next time, because we're not going to get to Malmaison today, clearly, there's the counterpiece, Josephine. But if you want a duel, I'll bring in a different image here.
Reminds me of the time you were having a lightsaber duel with my kids over Skype.
Oh, I loved it. I wish we had that film. Here is an engraving of Louis coming at you.
Of course, people on the audio won't get the benefit of this, but we're playing around here with the video. Well, I guess that's a good place to wrap up episode number 36, David, unless you have some final words.
Well, it's been a long haul, and Napoleon has finally come to what is clearly going to be the end of his political career, of his control of the government. But, and this will surprise none of our listeners, the story still has a long way to go. There's a great deal to happen between now and when Napoleon surrenders to the British, and of course between then and when he dies, and then in 1840 is brought back to France. So stay tuned, my friends. There's a lot of you have written that you don't look forward to the end of this podcast. It must be said that I'm not sure that the podcast is ever going to come to an end. And I'll end with one very quick plea. If any of you have not yet gone to my website, NapoleonicHistory.com, I'd appreciate you giving it a hit just to build the numbers up. At any rate, Cameron, it's been fun. Next time we'll do this video again. I'll have a few more little trinkets to show you. For those of you who are interested, there's sort of a quick look at the library. The ladder over there is, and that's the entrance. The ladder over there is because I'm doing, some work. And then there's, I don't know if you can really see Napoleon, the big statue there above the correspondence and so on. Anyway, there you go. A little quick tour of the library, and it's been a real pleasure, my friend. We'll see you next time.